Hi, I'm Kerry O'Brien and I've been a journalist for 45 years. In this DVD, you'll see interviews with people affected by trauma, and you'll hear in their words how they were treated by the media. There are lessons to be learnt from what they have to say. If you treat interviewees with respect and approach them with as much research and knowledge as you can muster with the time available, then you'll get a better interview. A person who has lost someone close to them in traumatic circumstances is almost invariably going through an intensely difficult personal experience. They're not often media savvy. It may help to try to explain the media process to them and tell them how your story is likely to be used. You might even explain that it might be used more than once, that it might be reshaped prior to broadcast or not used at all. Fundamentally, whatever pressure is on you to deliver a story, the people you need to make that story have a right to be treated with respect. Pam ODonnell is the mother of Nicole Patterson, a 28-year-old psychotherapist and youth counsellor who was murdered in her own home in April 1999.
Firstly, dealing with the media was daunting. It was a new experience. There just seemed to be cameras and people everywhere. One thing that I did find harrowing, it wasn't so much all the press assembled at the courtroom door. It was when you were walking, there were people tearing past you and in your face with cameras. It's very hard to deal with when you're going through what's a traumatic experience anyhow.
Messina, the daughter of George Helvargas, was stabbed to death as she tended her grandmother's grave in a Melbourne cemetery in 1997.
The early days I had very hard experience because everybody, generally the media, wanted to get a story of us and they didn't realise what we've been going through. They didn't realise that our daughter got crucified and all they wanted is a story. In one experience, I like to say that we've been through so many tragedies, and it didn't help having the media waiting outside. We couldn't even get out the front door, and without even knowing that they are coming. And sometimes I go to a cemetery and I find the media waiting there for me. They're the things they should think about it before they do it. It wasn't very easy for me. And when you got cameras and cars waiting outside, it makes you feel like you're a prisoner in your house, waiting for hours and keep on knocking on your door, and you're telling them that you're not prepared to give an interview, and yet keep on pushing, and that should not be happening.
Roger and Joy Membry's daughter Elizabeth disappeared in December 1994. Police believe she was murdered in her own home, although her body has never been found.
The whole scenario with the cameras, and when you've never had this sort of experience ever and never thought you would, and yeah, you're trying to say everything's so right and help find your daughter, and it was just absolutely frightening, and I still remember it to this day.
Vanessa Robinson's story is a salient one for everyone in the news media. It's a story for all journalists about what not to do. It starts with a loosely written police media statement that wasn't questioned by journalists. That in turn led many journalists to a conclusion that was completely wrong. There was trial by media. Here, Vanessa Robinson tells us what happened after her two sons died due to a faulty gas heater.
At the time, I was actually believed to be responsible for the death of my children. I was unofficially arrested, and basically everything took off from there. The media got hold of the story and pretty much everything got out of control. I suppose, it was nationally exposed, I suppose, as a murder of my children. There was nothing left to start with, and, you know, every time they reported on my family, I had nothing left. I mean, it was really hard for me to go back into the community and face everybody after what happened. My boys are my life, and, you know, we're just an average family, and I had to sort of come back, and I didn't have a place to live, and I didn't have my boys. And I had to start again, and, you know, and I knew that all these people were judging me and, you know, talking constantly. So yeah, that was really hard. I feel that, you know, what sort of people, how they represented me, it's something that I can never get back, you know. I was a good mum. I did what I could for my kids. You know, I was the mum that overpacked my kids' school lunches. And for people to assume, or be made to assume by the media, that I hurt my children or I wasn't a good mum, it's really difficult. It's something that it's really difficult to live with, you know, and I think about it all the time.
Jim Ward had worked for Esso for 19 years and was at Esso's Longford gas plant near Sale when it exploded in 1998. On the day of the explosion, he was the panel operator in the plant's control room. After the fire killed 2 workmates and injured 8 others, Jim Ward activated the shutdown system and made the phone calls to trigger emergency procedures. For that, he received a bravery medal. In April 1999, at the Royal Commission into the disaster, his employers turned on him and tried to make him the scapegoat. They said he had failed to correctly respond to a system failure, which they claimed was quote unquote due to reasons peculiar to himself.
Accuracy in reporting a trauma victim's circumstances is paramount. From personal experience, having seen the reports, a direct reflection of a conversation that took place between myself and a journalist, and noticing that it's not exactly right. Misspellings, poor descriptions of very basic circumstances. It adds to whatever trauma you're feeling at that time. And I distinctly remember reading a report about, in my circumstance, the 2 dead men. And one of them, his surname was misspelt. And straight away I was thinking of his sister and how she would feel. I knew his sister personally, and I was thinking, how would she feel about someone so dear to her having their surname misspelt in a report about his death?
I have found so many times that electronic media and the written media, they are made mistakes, and that makes me not angry, but make me feel that I disappointed my daughter. A small mistake can bring back a whole stress and emotion to us
everybody assumed that I hurt my children, and I know there was a lot of, it's a Facebook page, and I know people were actually quite nasty, and I think a few people threatened my family as well, and it was quite nasty, all of it. A lot of what was in the media was incorrect. A lot of people couldn't get my children's birthdays right, like their ages at least as well. And that was hard, you know, they're trying to report something and they couldn't even get the basic facts right. So a lot of it was all inaccurate. And it was really difficult seeing my children's photos splashed across the world for everybody to see.
Kamina Lyle had spent 15 years as a reporter and foreign correspondent when she found herself on the other side of tragedy as a victim and survivor of the Boxing Day tsunami in 2004.
Often the easiest interviews to get are the very early ones, where you're just grabbing someone as they're coming out of an environment and saying, what happened, then what, then what, then what? And often the information just spews forth, so to speak. But when we go back 2 or 3 days later, when that adrenaline and the protection of all of the whatever it is that happens in our physical bodies to protect us to some extent from the shock has passed and it's just raw emotion, that's when I think the informed consent is just a little bit ethically trickier, because how do we know that that person is in a solid emotional space to make a decision that is going to actually live with them for the rest of their lives? I think we have to recognise that we're actually entering into a contract. We're actually saying, here I am from this news organisation, I'm going to write this story and it's going to be read at some point in the future and we don't know what's going to happen to it. Are you, to the best of your ability, able to agree to that? I don't think we can. I think it's just as manipulative to kind of assume that people can't as it is to assume that people can. Like there has to be at some level some good faith or trust that providing you're upfront and transparent and you seek that consent and you give the person permission to change their mind, then you can only progress. So it is human nature to be curious and to want more information, but there's a line at which it no longer becomes the public's business what happened. And I don't know where that line is as a journalist. The only person who knows where that line is the person themselves. And so our job is to enable them to say, that's the line, that's it. And sometimes they have to say it, and sometimes you can just get it.
On one occasion, I met with a journalist. It was a television interview, and there was a particular point that I wanted to make, and I was promised that that would be aired. And because quite often you'll find that not everything you said goes to air. And I said, I really want this to go to air. I feel strongly about it, and I was assured that it would. On viewing the program, it wasn't there. I just felt let down, disappointed. I thought at least I could have had a phone call to say that, you know, it's not been included. I did try on your behalf. I'm sorry. There was one time that a journalist contacted us and wanted us to speak in length about our situation, about what happened to my daughter, and came and spent time with us in depth, learning all about her, and the stories were just wonderful. They really did explain just what sort of a person she was, and it was well worth that extra time that he'd spent with us.
Gary Brown lost his son Adrian, daughter-in-law Mirabelle, and their children Eric, aged 8, Matthew, 7, and their sister Brielle, aged 3, when the Black Saturday bushfire hit their home at Bald Spur Road, Kinglake, on February 7, 2009.
We did 2 TV interviews of which they took the time to sit down, chat about everything, and while the cameraman was setting up, and then we went into it, and I found that very easy to adapt to. A week after the tragedy, my daughter was approached by a reporter for an interview. She agreed on the understanding that she would see the finished copy prior to printing. This was agreed to was done, and we were very satisfied.
I had to do a live cross to a morning television show, a breakfast current affairs type show. I understood it was going to run for 2 minutes. I understood that there was going to be questions that were seeking out a grab. But to be greeted by the host and saying to me, and going through questions and asking for the glib response, which was meeting the glib question, and then finishing off the 2-minute cross with live to air saying, "Thanks, mate." There was no relationship between us. I wasn't his mate. Subsequent to that, after the decision of the Longford Royal Commission was handed down and I'd been cleared of any implication in the cause of the explosion and death of 2 of my workmates and injury to 8 others, another live cross to the same person. And in the preamble to the live cross, he said, "And here is our old mate, Jim Ward." And straight away, I felt defensive and on edge. I didn't want to engage with someone that was contriving a relationship that wasn't there.
Look, we are not a commodity. Our daughter is not a commodity, and her murderer is not a commodity. They're real life situations and trauma, and we just feel that we should be talked to and by journalists in a way that is a discussion which is not going to impinge on our rights to grieve ourselves.
The question I most hate is being asked, how do you feel? And there's no answer to that because I immediately get very, very upset and angry and would like to swear, and you think, well, how do you expect me to feel? It's just so impersonal.
Sometimes you'll walk out of court and the journalists will say, well, how do you feel now? Well, how do you think we feel? Just put yourself in our shoes. Your daughter's been butchered by a psychopathic, evil, low-life murderer. And what do you think we feel? We feel grief, we feel shock, we feel injustice. Please put yourself in our position and think, what about if it was my daughter, my sister, my niece, my mother, my auntie? Just think about that.
I sometimes feel for people that I observe and watch as a consumer of the media as to how much their life has suddenly become symbolised by that moment that they were captured in that rage or in that grief or in that hysteria, when it's really nothing to do with who they are as a human being. It's just that moment of trauma that's being captured.
To conclude, here are a few tips that should help you. Do identify yourself. Do ask permission. Avoid the pack mentality. Explain the parameters. Show real empathy. Be aware. Get it right. Be supportive. Listen. Resist the cliche. Don't make promises you can't keep. Don't coerce, cajole or trick. Don't feign compassion. Don't say you know how they feel. Don't just go for the quote.